Hello everybody and welcome to my annual video breaking down my favorite and a few of my least favorite movies of the year. It's New Year's Eve, which means that we are saying goodbye to 2024, and I'm excited to talk about some of these standout movies, mostly in a good way, of the year. Before we get to my favorite and least favorite though, as I always do, I want to give out a few awards. This is kind of a throwback to the Screenies, which we used to do back on Screen Junkies, the award show that you know and love, and it's just a way to recognize a few extra films every year. So the first award I'm going to give out is the award for most accurate title, and that goes to Hundreds of Beavers, which, depending on what context you're looking at, it's either a very accurate title or not an accurate title at all. But it is a movie that indeed features a man fighting hundreds of beavers throughout the course of the film. So it was a shoo-in for this award. The next award is the Lazarus Award for the most impressive rise from death of 2024, and I am giving this award to a real underdog, which would be Disney. Disney had an abysmal 2023, but they followed that up with a string of hits, including Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine, which were the top two movies of the summer. Even with Mufasa not hitting the heights that some hoped it would, this was a good year for Disney, and we'll see if it will continue this streak into 2025 with movies like Snow White. This next award is for biggest surprise, and I'm giving the award to Twisters, which was not a great movie, but was certainly an enjoyable one. And when you look at everything it had stacked against it, a sequel that came out decades after the original, a cast that couldn't possibly live up to the standards set by Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton and Philip Seymour Hoffman, it was actually a pretty big surprise to me that the movie was as good as it was. I don't think that you could approach the greatness of Twister, because that really is tied to a generation, specifically my generation. But I was quite surprised by how much I enjoyed the movie. Next up is the award for most valuable performance. It goes to a performance in a movie that would have completely fallen apart without that performance, and I'm giving it to Josh Hartnett in M. Night Shyamalan's Trap. The movie Trap had all of the M. Night Shyamalan things that we've come to know and love, awkward dialogue, some truly what the hell is going on moments. But Josh Hartnett kept it all together. This movie would not have worked without him, and that is the definition of the year's most valuable performance. Next up is the award for best performance that never had a chance. And what I mean by that is a really, really good performance in a movie that never had a shot at any kind of awards legitimacy. And I'm giving this award to Naomi Scott in Smile 2. I may not have loved the sequel as much as I loved the original, but I cannot deny that Naomi Scott is great in the movie. However, because Smile 2 is a horror movie and not one of the artsy horror movies that the Academy occasionally gives lip service to, there was no chance that she was ever going to be nominated. Still, good acting is good acting, and I have to recognize Naomi Scott for her performance in Smile 2. Next up is the award for Best Movie You Didn't Watch, a really good movie that just didn't do anything at the box office, and there was a lot of competition for the award this year, but I'm giving it to Strange Darling, which has been covered on a few YouTube channels, but did basically no business. Strange Darling is a horror thriller that's told out of order, so that everything you think you know at the beginning turns out to be completely different by the end of the film. This movie had me interested, it had me engaged, it features some great performances, and if you haven't seen Strange Darling, it's available to watch at home and rent right now. It is definitely a recommendation. My next award is for biggest turnaround, and it goes to a director who had a movie that was on my worst of list last year and made a film that was one of my favorite movies this year, and that is Jesse Eisenberg. He made a movie last year called When You Finish Saving the World that I absolutely hated, and he followed it up with a movie called A Real Pain, which I absolutely loved. He's great in it. Kieran Culkin is also great in it. He is the frontrunner, I think, right now to win an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. This is the reason why you can't just write off a director based on one or two movies, because I was not very optimistic about Eisenberg's career after his first film, but I am very optimistic about it after his second film. Next up is the award for Best Love Triangle, and I'm giving that to the movie Challengers. I really enjoyed this film, and I have to admit that this was a pretty compelling love triangle. It may not have been the sexy time threesome movie that the trailers promised, but I thought that it was a very good story about a very complicated and messed up dynamic between three people who might have been better off if they'd never met each other, which is kind of the definition of a great love triangle. Naturally, the next award is for Worst Love Triangle, and for purely off-screen reasons, I have to go with It Ends With Us. To be fair, on screen, it wasn't a great love triangle either. I thought the movie dealt with some very important issues, but the love story was by far the weakest part of the film. But when you add in everything that was going on before the movie's release, during the movie's release, and now all of the legal wrangling that's been happening for the last couple weeks, I can't think of another cinematic love triangle that ended so poorly. This next award is one of the favorite awards that I give. It's the movie that sounds like a parody that isn't, which means a movie that seems like a parody of a film that critics would love and enjoy, but is in actuality a real movie. Past winners have included Drive My Car and Oppenheimer. This year's winner is a 3.5-hour epic about a Jewish Bauhaus architect from Hungary battling anti-immigrant sentiment and class warfare while also struggling with a paralyzed wife and a crippling drug addiction. This sounds like a parody of a movie that critics would love, but it's actually The Brutalist, which is an Oscar frontrunner. And it just goes to show you that sometimes, even if a movie sounds like obvious awards bait, it can also be actual awards bait. Next is the award for MVP Actor of the Year. It was a close race between two actors. The runner-up is Sebastian Stan, who I think put in two legitimately great lead performances in The Apprentice and A Different Man. But the winner this year is Nicholas Hoult, who was great in 3 different movies: Nosferatu, Juror Number 2, and The Order. Nosferatu is a box office hit, but I think that he was kind of screwed over with the other films. Juror Number 2 was given a very limited release and then dumped on streaming by HBO and Warner Brothers, and The Order was also given a limited release, but not a whole lot of support behind it, so I don't think a lot of people saw it or saw his performance in it. Needless to say, I thought that he was great in all 3 movies. I think he should be in awards contention. I wish that they would give acting awards based on the total body of work that an actor did in any given year, because by that metric, I think that Nicholas Hoult would be a frontrunner. Next up is the award for MVP Actress. The runner-up this year I gave to Lupita Nyong'o, who was the lead role in what I thought was one of the best horror movies of the year in A Quiet Place Day One, and the best animated film of the year in The Wild Robot. But I'm giving the award to Aubrey Plaza because not only did I think she was the MVP actress, but I thought that she was the MVP actor in everything that she was in. She was great in My Old Ass as the older version of Maisie Stella's main character. It was a Sundance hit, and I think somewhat underseen for how good it was. She seemed to be the only person in Megalopolis that truly understood what exactly the movie was that she was in. I can't necessarily say she was great in it, but she was appropriate in it, which is good enough for me. And then I thought she was great in Agatha All Along. She got to be super witchy, but at the same time had a grounded story that really set the base for Agatha's entire character. The MVP actor or actress doesn't always have to be in the biggest movies of the year or in the lead role in every movie. They just have to be the person when you look at a movie and say, I couldn't see that movie without that person. And Aubrey Plaza did that 3 times in 2024. Next up is the award for Most Spectacular Failure, and on so many levels, that goes to Joker Folie à Deux. It was hated by many fans who saw it. It completely bombed at the box office, not just underperformance, but an absolute crater job, and it totally redefined how people see Todd Phillips, Joaquin Phoenix, and their approach to the whole material. I didn't hate the movie as much as a lot of people did, but I have to admit that it was an absolutely spectacular failure on a creative level, on a box office level, on an audience response level, to the degree that I haven't seen in quite some time. Next is the award for Most Entertaining Non-Movie, and I am giving this award to the press tour of Wicked, and more specifically, Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo's interviews, whether they were spontaneously breaking into tears or pretending to know what the term holding space meant.
This week, people are taking the lyrics of Defying Gravity and really holding space with that and feeling power in that.
I didn't know that that was happening.
I've seen it, yeah.
That's really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
The entertainment value of Wicked wasn't just in the theater. It was preceded by weeks of free entertainment from both of these actresses. I thought that they were both great in the movie, and their performances really started when they were sitting across from an interviewer.
You
You're
have been
amazing.
the light
You're
of the
amazing.
day. You are such a gift.
You brought such light into the room. Thank you very much
We appreciate
for coming into
you.
this room today.
My last two awards are also connected to each other. The first is for Best Comeback. The runner-up and a close runner-up was Demi Moore in The Substance, but I'm giving the award to Pamela Anderson in The Last Showgirl. It's a very small movie that's currently in limited release. I think it's going wider as we get into January, and she is great in it. She's already received critical acclaim and some awards nominations. Pamela Anderson is somebody that hasn't always gotten a fair shake from the public, from people in her life, and she has really channeled all of that into a really great performance in The Last Showgirl. If you haven't seen the movie, I highly recommend it. Hopefully you'll get a chance to see it very soon.
Who puts money into a circus that's not Cirque du Soleil, right? That's dumb.
And my final award is for Worst Comeback, and I have to give it to Francis Ford Coppola, who's directed some of the best movies of all time. Megalopolis was a divisive film. Some of the artsier critical sites have put it on their best of list. Some people have said it's one of the worst movies that they've ever seen. I'm not here to pass final judgment on that, but you have to admit that it wasn't a great comeback for him.
I work without caring what happens to either of us. So go back to the club.
Maybe time will judge Megalopolis differently, but as for right now, Francis Ford Coppola's big comeback didn't really happen.
Entitles me?
Yes.
Entitles me?
Yes.
Entitles me?
Yes.
So those are my awards for 2024. Let's get to some of my favorite movies. And before we get to my top 10, there were actually a lot of runners-up this year. This has been an interesting year in that I didn't really have a handful of absolute favorite movies. I had several that were all kind of clustered together. And so it was really difficult for me to narrow this down to 10 movies. And all of these movies were at some point in contention. So I have to get a shout out to some of my other favorites that didn't make the top 10, including A Real Pain, which I mentioned before, Civil War from Alex Garland, which I thought was a great war film and a film about journalism. Not everybody loved that one. Challengers, which I mentioned before, was a movie I enjoyed a lot. I Saw the TV Glow was a film that I came around on as I learned more about it and as I watched it again, and I think that it really deserves a spot here on my runner-up list. Sing Sing is a really great movie that is an awards contender. I don't know what A24 was doing with the release of it, but I hear that you might be able to see it in January. Daughters is a documentary that debuted at Sundance. It's now available on Netflix about the daughters of men who are in prison, a very powerful documentary. Dee Dee is a great coming-of-age film set at the dawn of the internet age that I really enjoyed and also cringed at, mainly because I remember doing some of the same things. September 5 is a really compelling look at the 1972 Munich Olympic Games hostage crisis that was very close to making my top 10. I mentioned Aubrey Plaza in My Old Ass. I thought this was a really touching movie about identity and shaping who you're going to be and how your past can shape your future. The Wild Robot was my favorite animated film of the year, also a clear contender for my top 10, and I'm really rooting for it to actually take home the Academy Award. Rebel Ridge was a Netflix original movie from Jeremy Saulnier that I loved. I think that I made a mistake by not reviewing it on the channel. I watched it a little too late, but I thought that it was a really great action movie from a director who's made several movies that I enjoy. Heretic was a really good movie from A24 starring Hugh Grant in one of his best performances ever. Conclave is another movie that I liked a lot. I had some issues with how they developed the quote-unquote twist at the end of the film, but you can't argue with the acting and the writing and just the idea of watching them elect a new pope. Maybe it's all fiction, but it was interesting fiction. I mentioned Juror Number 2 when I was talking about Nicholas Hoult. I thought that he was great in the movie, and this movie really was done a disservice by Warner Brothers. Even if their plan was always to release it on streaming, they should have rethought that plan. More people should have been able to see Juror Number 2, and I think that it would have done well. I also mentioned The Last Showgirl and Pamela Anderson's performance in it. Jamie Lee Curtis, Dave Bautista, also great in the movie. Memoir of a Snail is one of the most unusual animated films I've ever seen. I went in blind, not really doing a whole lot of research, and expected your usual kind of cute animated film, but it's actually an R-rated movie that is about the life of a very, very unlucky girl as she grows up and learns difficult life lessons throughout, but it's also uplifting. If you want something that's really off the beaten path, then Memoir of a Snail is the movie for you. And then I have two documentaries that aired on Netflix. The first is Will and Harper, which I thought was a great road movie about Will Ferrell and a longtime friend of his that came out as trans very late in life. There was just so much humanity in this documentary, and I think that if more people watched it, they may understand a a lot more about trans people and what they go through. And then The Remarkable Life of Evelyn, which was again almost on my top 10, maybe the most emotionally affecting documentary that I saw this year or any other year. The movie is about a man who sadly died at a very young age, but after his death, his parents found that his life had touched so many others through computer gaming. I just really thought that this was a great documentary. And like I said, if there was going to be a number 11 spot, this might have been the movie that was there. But there are only 10 spots, so let's get to my number 10 film on my favorites of 2024. And I'm giving this to A Different Man. I mentioned Sebastian Stan earlier. He is so good in this movie. He plays a man with neurofibromatosis who is able to find what he thinks is a miracle cure that ends up making him look like, well, Sebastian Stan. But as he dives into what he thinks is his dream life, he meets another man with neurofibromatosis, played by Adam Pearson, whose outlook on life mirrors so much of what he aspires to be and can't quite get to. It is a pitch black comedy, but it also features some great performances. And when we talk about my top 10 and what differentiates these 10 movies from the others that I like so much, it often comes back to which movies do I think about the most over the course of the year? Which movies do I go back and analyze and play over in my head or think about moments from? And A Different Man took this number 10 spot because I have thought about it so much since I saw it. It came out earlier this year. I think it's now available to rent if you haven't seen it. It is, I should warn you, off the beaten path in a way that a couple of other movies on this list are. But if you're a Sebastian Stan fan or you're just looking for a very offbeat black comedy, then A Different Man, I think, could scratch that itch. At number 9 is a movie that I mentioned earlier, Hundreds of Beavers. This movie was actually a 2023 release in many parts of the world. It was recommended to me in late 2023 when I was visiting New Zealand, but it counts as a 2024 release here. And I think that this is probably the funniest movie that I've seen this year. It is a rebirth of Charlie Chaplin and Looney Tunes and slapstick. So much of the humor in this movie is stupid, but I love stupid humor when it's well executed. And if you're just looking for a pure comedy, then I don't think that you could do much better in 2024 or 2023 than Hundreds of Beavers. At number 8 on my list is a very small movie called Ghostlight. It received a very limited release and hasn't really gotten a lot of awards consideration. Ghostlight is about a man who has recently suffered a tragic loss in his family, who finds acceptance and comfort in the arms of a local theater troupe who are putting on a production of Romeo and Juliet. Movies aren't just about plot and character, they're also about where they find you in life. And Ghostlight found me at the exact perfect time in my life to really hit me emotionally. I saw Ghostlight this summer when I was visiting New York, and I have thought about it probably every week since then. It is such a genuine and real and touching film, and it features really fantastic performances all around. But the lead of the film is an actor named Keith Kupferer, who you're probably going to hear me talk about going into awards season as somebody who I think should be nominated because I think he's phenomenal in that film. If you haven't heard of Ghostlight, I don't blame you, but it should be available for you to watch at home. Seek it out because it is a really, really good movie. At number 7 is a movie that you probably have heard of, which is Wicked. I am a sucker for musicals, or at least musicals that are well made, and I wasn't familiar at all with Wicked going into the film. I'd never had a chance to see it on stage, and I not only liked the musical itself, but how John M. Chu brought it to life. I thought it was a great example of the possibilities of big screen filmmaking, the sets, the production design. I liked the musical numbers. I thought that the acting was really good in the film. Wicked was just an all-around really enjoyable film for me, and I was very happy that I could put a musical on my top 10 list because there are so few of them made and even fewer still that are usually one of my 10 favorites of the year. Wicked is now an awards contender, and of course, as with everything that's popular, there is a backlash among some people, but this was just a magical experience for me, and I knew pretty early on that it was going to be on my top 10. At number 6 is a film from India called All We Imagine as Light, which the country chose not to submit for Best International Feature at the Academy Awards this year. I think it absolutely would have been nominated had it been chosen as India's selection. All We Imagine as Light is about a nurse whose husband moved to Europe many years before, who feels alone in the world. She finds connection through her co-workers who are also searching for their own place in life. This is an example of a very small movie about very big things, and there is a lot of humanity in All We Imagine as Light. It's one of those things movies where you almost feel like you're watching a documentary. You don't think of them as actors, you think of them as real people. And the culmination, the end of the film, I thought was beautiful. The final shot is one of my favorite final shots of the year. So All We Imagine Is Light, again, another movie that you may not have heard of, but I think that you should seek out. I don't know if it's available to watch at home yet. I think it's still in limited release, but hopefully they'll get it out soon because more people should see this. At number 5 is Sean Baker's Anora, which pound for pound might feature the best performances of the year, starting with Mikey Madison in the lead and going down pretty much the cast list. This was a great way to turn the Pretty Woman story on its head, and I loved the movie as it descended into actual chaos. It turns from fairy tale into a harsh tale of reality. Sean Baker is so good at this, taking the image or the fantasy of something and breaking it down into the reality of it, whether it's Disney or this type of Cinderella story. Anora is also a great example of how you can mix tone in a movie. At times, it is very funny, almost a slapstick comedy, but it also gets very serious, and by the end, I think is one of the most penetrating human dramas that we saw this year. We'll see how it does on the awards scene, but as far as I'm concerned, Anora is absolutely one of the best movies of the year. At number 4 is Dune Part 2. The original Dune was on my top 10 list. Dune Part 2 is as well. The only reason it's at number 4 is just because my top 3 were also great movies. Denis Villeneuve is doing stuff along with Christopher Nolan that is keeping the idea of cinematic spectacle alive. I had not read Dune when I saw the first movie. I had read Dune by the time I saw Dune Part 2. I wasn't sure how they were going to adapt it. And I think that Denis Villeneuve and the team behind the movie did a really good job. Dune, the movies, and Dune, the book, are two separate things, and I think that they are both executed very well. It sounds like we're going to get another Dune movie. I don't know how that one's going to turn out, having also read that book, but I thought that Dune Part 2 was able to deliver on everything that was set up in the first movie and give us a true cinematic epic on the scale of the great ones like Ben-Hur that have been made in the past. I really think that these two movies together are going to stand the test of time.
Listen, I gave.
At number 3 is a recent release, Nosferatu, from director Robert Eggers. I have been sort of hit or miss on his movies in the past, but this was by far my favorite. It just hit my frequency. I talk all the time about movies that are on your frequency. This one was. I loved the production design, the style of the movie. I loved the acting in the film. I did not have any problem with how they decided to represent Count Orlok in the movie. This to me was absolute cinema from beginning to end. You can put the Martin Scorsese meme up for me. I was transported. I was transfixed by everything. I'm actually hoping I get another chance to see it on the big screen before it's out of theaters. I'm happy that at least for its first week that audiences turned out to see it. I was worried that they wouldn't. And this has been a very divisive film. Robert Eggers films generally have been very divisive. A lot of times I've been on the other side of that divide, but this time I am squarely in Camp Nosferatu. One of my favorite movies of the year. At number 2 is a movie that I mentioned in the awards section, which is The Brutalist. It is 3.5 hours long, which I think is going to put some people off of it. But it is such an interesting story about this architect played by Adrian Brody who flees the Holocaust looking for the American dream. He meets a multimillionaire in Guy Pearce who seems to have achieved the American dream and wants Adrian Brody to help him achieve his dreams even further. But it's ultimately about the facade of that dream. This is not exactly what I would call a uplifting movie, but it is certainly one of the most well-made movies of the year. The production design, again, great. The music is great, and the performances are fantastic in the film. Like I said, The Brutalist is a big time investment, and it's a movie that's not going to be for everybody, but it certainly was a movie for me. Much like All We Imagine Is Light, which I said was a small movie about big things, this is also in some ways a small movie, but in other ways a very, very big movie about big things, and it ranks number 2 on my list.
Perhaps you can help your husband sound less like he shines shoes for a wage.
Haven't you told them anything about me?
Laszlo, how long have you been here now? 4, 5 years? You have no excuse anymore. I'm sorry, I got a little carried away there. Will you please pass that back?
And so we arrive at number 1. This is always such a tough choice for me to make. And really, I always have to just think about what movie stood out to me the most in 2024. When I think about the film year, what's the first movie that's going to pop into my mind that I've thought about the most, that I think captures so much of what's great about movies into one package? Last year, that movie was Oppenheimer. This year, it's a much smaller movie, but just as audacious, because my number one movie of the year is The Substance. I said when I reviewed it that people are going to either love or hate this movie, and I absolutely love it. Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley are great as two versions of the same person, or are they really just one version in two different bodies? The movie also has great supporting performances, including a real gross out from Dennis Quaid, and I say that in all of the best ways. This is not just a movie, this is a cinematic experience, and Coralie Farge, who directed the film, designed it to be a cinematic experience. It is at times overwhelming, and by the end, so much is being thrown at you that I can understand why some people would just throw their hands and give up, but I didn't, because I just felt like I understood what Coralie Farge was trying to do, the sort of tongue-in-cheek humor that the film often had, the fact that it has such a deeper message about society and the expectations that we place on women, the expectations that women place on themselves, the delusion that some grand change will be able to change who you are, and the idea of running from yourself under the illusion that you are trying to defy what society thinks of you. There's so much going on there. And The Substance is another film I don't think I've gone a day or 2 days since I saw it without thinking about it in some aspect. Everything that I can point to that I love about movies, performances, cinematography, music, direction, theme, writing, all of it is there in The Substance. And I sometimes gravitate towards polarizing films for my number one pick. Tar was a number one movie of mine. Annette was a number one movie of mine. And The Substance is yet another film that some people might watch and go, I don't get it. Well, that's the magic of movies. Every movie makes a different sized impression on everyone who sees it. The Substance made a big impression on me, and it is my number one movie of 2024.
That's what we want tonight! Pretty girls should always smile!
So before we wrap out things for 2024, let's briefly address my 5 least favorite movies of the year. Now, I don't go out looking for bad movies, so there may be some that are on others' lists that aren't on mine, because sometimes I'll just actively avoid something. But these are the 5 movies that I sit and think about and say to myself, what movies would I not want to sit through and watch ever again? They weren't just bad, they were movies that I never want to experience again in my life. And at number 5 is Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scar Giver. The first Rebel Moon was actually number 5 on this list last year, so I guess it's fitting that the sequel is number 5 on my least favorite of 2024. I just did not enjoy watching this movie. Zack Snyder has talent as a filmmaker, but nothing about this story was compelling or interesting to me. And by the end of it, I just wanted it to be over. I know that there are director's cuts that are out there. I can't imagine subjecting myself to a longer version of either one of these movies. And by my metric, as far as movies that I would not want to sit through again, Rebel Moon Parts 1 and 2 have to be on that list. At number 4 is an infamously bad movie that came out early this year, Madam Web, part of Sony's Spider-Man universe, which the CEO of Sony apparently feels was the victim of critics being unfair. Well, I guess I'm just heaping on the unfairness here, because I thought that Madam Web was a horrible film, terrible dialogue, bad ADR, bad story, no real redeeming factor other than the fact that it was just audaciously bad. I will give Madam Web this. It was bad in an interesting way, which I can't say about the other 3 movies ahead of it on this list, but still, even if you want to give it credit for being enjoyably bad, it's still bad. At number 3 is the sequel to the movie that was number 1 on this worst of list last year, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2. You know, they say that you can't polish a turd, but I disagree, because Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2 is in fact a polished version of the turd that was the first film. There was more money put into it, but I can't really say that there was a whole lot more effort put into it. Having said that, enough people went to see it that they are making more of these stupid things. I think 2025 has 2 or 3 other movies that are spin-offs of public domain characters that are all going to meet in some kind of low-effort monsterverse. That's great for them, but I still think that this was low-hanging fruit, the cinematic equivalent of a get-rich-quick scheme. I guess maybe it's a slight win for Blood and Honey 2 that it was only my 3rd least favorite movie of the year and not my least favorite movie of the year. At number 2 is a movie that just came out, which is Kraven the Hunter, another Sony Spider-Man spinoff. It was not for me as entertainingly bad as Madam Web was. I thought that it was just bad, and bad in an aggressive way that had me wishing that it was over almost from the beginning of the film. Again, the performances in this movie, terrible. The dialogue, terrible. When people ask me the difference between a bad film that's entertaining to watch and a bad film that's not entertaining to watch, then I will just lock them in a room and show them Madam Web and Kraven the Hunter back to back, although I'm worried that that could be considered torture in some territories. And finally, we get to my least favorite movie of the year. Out of all these films, the ones that I would rather jump out of a window than have to sit through again. And that goes to Borderlands, which I thought was incompetent on every level. The story was borderline unintelligible. The performances were flat and uninspired. Jack Black's voice performance made me want to climb into the projection booth and break the projector, not to save myself, but to save the one or two other people that were in the theater with me from having to experience the rest of this film. I thought that Borderlands was just atrocious. I don't understand how this movie made it to theaters in the state that it was in. When you're up against movies like Kraven the Hunter and Madam Web, it is sort of a twisted achievement to come out at number 1, but there was really no contest in my mind as to what my least favorite movie of the year was. Borderlands is an awful film with no value in any way, not even in a fun, so bad it's good way. It's just so bad, and it will remain, I think, forever my least favorite film of 2024.
Y'all bitches need to eat your own butts with your poopy mouth ass faces until you die from loser poisoning like the stupid puss crotches that you is.
So that is my rundown of the best, the worst, and everything in between of the year. What do you think? What were your favorite movies? What were your least favorite movies of 2024? Let me know down in the comments below. And before we go, I just want to quickly say thank you to everybody out there that is watching this video and that has watched the channel this year. 2024 has not been the best year for me. It's actually been a really, really tough year. I've tried to keep most of that off of the channel, but I can't thank everybody enough who's out there watching the channel and making this a possibility for me. Talking about movies and watching movies, loving movies, sharing that love has always been my passion. And the ability to do this for a living is something that's not lost on me. And I know that this year, because of everything else that's been going on, my output dropped a little bit. And there are some times when maybe you didn't feel that same passion and enthusiasm for me, and yet you still came back and you still kept watching. So legitimately, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching. Things are getting better, and I do have plans for 2025 for the channel. I'm going to try to keep coming up with new things, new ideas, new shows, new ways to interact, because I want to keep this fresh, not only for me, but for you. As we close out 2024 and enter 2025, I would like to wish you a very happy, healthy, and prosperous new year. And I will see you right back here tomorrow as we break down all of the movies that could potentially be on my best and worst list 1 year from today. Have a happy holiday if you're out there celebrating New Year's. I will see you in 2025. Until then, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.